And we're going to move into our first keynote for the day, who's joining us virtually, but is going to talk about Planet Youth. So are we good, Blair? Good? Working on it? Okay. So we can turn over to Dr. Ingibjörg Eva, who is going to share, I think, some important information that we can take some lessons and some learning from. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Hey everybody, do you hear me? I can't see anything, and I don't know if my slides have been shared. Yes, let me see.
We can see the slides.
Yep. Let me see. Maybe start a video as well, right? It's nicer to see people. Good seeing everybody, your tiny dots on the computer screen, but I assume everybody's happy today, right? Coming together, talking about this important topic. I missed yesterday's session, but it was good to get a brief recap in the beginning. As we often say, we don't know the local context. We're happy to work with people around the world, but we need the local people so we can actually make a difference. So I'm here today to talk about the Icelandic prevention model and the Planet Youth approach and how we here at Planet Youth work. My name is Ingibjörg Eva Pórisdóttir. I am the Chief Analytics and Advisory Officer at Planet Youth, and I've been working in the field of primary prevention for the last decade or so. So let me see. Okay. So Iceland knows how to stop teen substance abuse, but the rest of the world isn't listening. It's a big text, and it was published in a newspaper article in 2017. And we hadn't really been promoting the Icelandic prevention model outside of Iceland, so it wasn't really true that the world wasn't listening. It was maybe the fact that the world wasn't really aware how hard we've been working in Iceland and how we have been working in Iceland. But what happened after this is that the article was shared very, very widely, and we published in Independent and BBC News, Huffington Post, and very other news outlets. And when this occurred, we started getting noticed, and we started getting phone calls, and people wanted to know how we have been working, what we have been doing, if we could come and help, if we could change the situation in the other communities around the world. And we really had to put our thinking cap on and realize, is this possible? Can we actually help people implement the Icelandic prevention model in different contexts? Because we had created infrastructure over a long time that kind of knew how to work together. But after some thinking and growing our team domestically and internationally, we realized that we actually can help, but it's not something that we can do by ourselves. So Planet Youth, just to tell you a bit about us, is a research and consultancy company that runs a guidance program in adolescent substance use with communities, towns, cities, and countries around the world. So we are an organization that is dedicated to improving well-being. And we do this by offering what we call the Planet Youth Guidance Program that is based on collaborative data-driven prevention approach that we call the Icelandic prevention model. So we're not implementing or advocating that our partners do what we did in Iceland, because we know that that's not necessarily the best way to work. And it's a very common misunderstanding that people think that we just tell them to do what we did in Iceland and everything is going to be fine. But as you know, communities are very different, and we have different challenges that we need to overcome. Instead, we are assisting our partners in designing and implementing, using these guiding principles, relying on the processes that we have within the Icelandic prevention model and that have created results in Iceland. So we're not exporting initiatives, strategies, and fixed how-tos, but we're working with the local communities on improving their social environments. So as I said, our phone kind of started ringing off the hook. So now we have what we call a global reach. We're a team of 19 that are working around the world. We have 11 people in Iceland, and then 8 to 9 in other countries that we work with. And then, of course, we have our partners that also do a lot of the work. It's not like we are doing everything. So we work with partners in Australia, Argentina, Mexico, Chile, Lithuania, Canada, New Zealand, the US, Europe, Belgium, Spain, Ireland, Scotland, and probably some more. And these projects are very different. We work with communities that have 2 schools, and then we work with the entire government in a very long country. So these are tailor-made using the processes. So in Chile, they started in 2017. In 2021, they were the first country outside of Iceland to implement the Icelandic prevention model for the entire country. And they have their own name for it, and they have been doing their own things. We're working with 2 states in Mexico. One is Guanajuato, and one is Yucatan. Guanajuato has been implementing since 2020. They actually started during COVID, which was quite the challenge. They have hired around 140 employees to work with the implementation. They have been working on various campaigns to improve the environments of children in the states, focusing a lot on the family. They created a prevention day, and they have an annual conference now. The second one will be in December this year. And another example of a partner that I'm just giving this variation of partners that work in different ways, so you don't think that it's just a one size fits all. We have partners in Ireland that we've been working with since 2018. And the way that they work is that they approach parents of younger children, for example, with topics that relate more to younger children, for example, with sleep and mental well-being, while they also educate parents about the risk and protective factors around adolescent substance use. So we have multiple partners, and everybody is kind of implementing in their own way with what fits for their community. But they have this mutual thing, is that they're all using the Icelandic prevention model. They're all using the 5 guiding principles of the Icelandic prevention model. They're applying a primary prevention approach designed to enhance the social environment of youth. We are all emphasizing community action, and we use the schools as a natural hub for the neighborhoods where we collect data and also where we focus our efforts. We engage and empower community members to make practical decisions using their data. We want to integrate researchers, policymakers, practitioners, and community members into one team that are dedicated into solving the problems that we have highlighted and set our focus on. And then we all are in agreement of we have to match the scope of the solution to the scope of the problem. So we're emphasizing long-term interventions and efforts to marshal adequate community resources. So we try to stay away from short-term programs and like fixes. So if we go a little bit into this before I tell you a bit more about what we've been doing in Iceland and how this has been working, is that, so the first guiding principle is that we are aiming at preventing substance use by altering the social environment in a manner that reduces the likelihood that young people will initiate use. We're not assuming that children or youth are rational social actors, but products of their social environment. That's not to say that they don't make their own decisions, but it's to say that the norms of society highly influence the decisions that they make. So the approach is addressing the underlying causes, so the risk and protective factors and the causes of the causes as well. So both at the societal level and also at the local community level. And we focus also on accessing and or hiring appropriate personnel to guide this local team building, to bridge the use of research evidence to practical implementation. Because I don't know how it is for you guys, but it's very often that primary prevention is part-time of somebody else's part-time job. We don't have enough resources. You're just supposed to do it with your little finger while you drink your coffee on your break. And it doesn't really work that way. The second one is that we have the schools as the natural hub. And that's not because it's the school's responsibility to change anything. It's because most adolescents, but this varies between communities, and we understand that most adolescents go to school close to their home, or a school at least creates a bridge between the family and the adolescents. So we have this hub where we can reach them. We work on strengthening the connections between families, schools, and the community at large. And by creating these groups that are cohesive, like a team, that are going to be working together, implementing the strategies that we focus on. It's very important to have the schools on board, because that is where we collect the data. And this is and the way that the Planned Youth system or the Icelandic prevention model works is that we are collecting data routinely. We're not just collecting it once, we are collecting over and over again, so we can know if we're heading in the right direction. We focus a lot on this data. So we want the data to be used to make decisions. It's both to make the decision to select the strategies, to develop the community capacity that we need to address these complex problems, but it's also just to capture and sustain the attention on the local factors. Everybody that works in primary prevention in the field knows what's going on in the community. We don't need a bunch of data to tell us necessarily what's going on, but we need the data to reaffirm with policymakers, reaffirm with parents to say, this is what is going on. What are we going to do? How are we going to react? And then we measure again, are we making these changes in the community that we want to? So we're not focused on individual level change, we're focused on community change. We want to create like a team science to practice approach to prevention by integrating all of these different key stakeholders to create a collaboration between them. So they're solving the complex problems with all the different resources that they have. So we know that researchers, policymakers, practitioners, community members, they all have different resources. They all have different understandings and approaches to solving problems. And we want that to be integrated, that they work together. Because very often these connections are more theoretical than functional and practical. And then finally, we want to match the scope of the solution, as I said. So we know that social conditions that promote substance use emerge from multiple complex sources over a period of time. It's usually not something one that pops up and this is what is promoting the substance use. These are very, very many different factors that we need to look into. Some we can intervene in, others are very, very difficult to intervene in, but we can if we focus on it. So the solutions are designed to counteract, mitigate, or eliminate these social conditions. So we have to think about the social environment as a whole, not just very specific segments. And we need everybody on board to understand that it is a long-term strategy. If it's not something that we're going to do overnight, but if we don't plant the tree today, we can't expect it to grow in 20 years. So we got to start somewhere. So based on these 5 guiding principles that I've gone over, we have 10 steps. One of our partners said that we oversimplified this. What do you mean? It's just 10 steps? Because it seems very simple, but then of course it's not. As everybody that knows that follows processes, there are a lot of things that have to happen so the processes work. So we focus a lot on building the local coalition, having the right people on board, having drivers to make the change, because we don't want this. We don't want people that start working with the Icelandic prevention model, that have the drive to start, that it just kind of all fizzles out, if that's a word, because we don't have anybody to take the work forward. We don't have anybody with dedicated time. So that's very important that we think about that. Sometimes communities collect data first and then they build the local coalition, but it all depends on what resources are available at any given time. So we go through this. We build a local coalition. We have local funding. We have something in place that's going to make this work at least for 5+ years, because that's how long it takes to see a difference. If we want to see a difference in the social environment, then we collect the data. We talk to the communities. We raise awareness. The data collection process is very organized, but before that, we have to have community investment. We need to know what we're going to measure, because how I would word something in my community means something completely different in your community, and maybe even across communities if we have very different populations with different understandings. So we need to be thinking about how can we be inclusive? how can we reach all the youth that we in our community? Then we use the data to enhance community participation and engagement. We use it to set strategies. What are we going to do? How are we going to work with the findings? What changes do we want to see in 2 years' time when we measure? So we put specific goals, and then in later steps, we start focusing on aligning this with policy and then immersing child and adolescent in primary prevention environments, activities, and messages, which usually comes at a later stage, but it is already in place in very many policies, but maybe not as a focus. So the way we work is that we usually run on a 5-year cycle because we don't want short-term fixes. So we focus on 5-year cycles where we start with a local coalition, collecting data, disseminating and creating strategies and action in the first year. In the second year, we're following up. We are still working very much. We evaluate how we're doing, we reassess, we see if we want to change, has something happened? Do we want to add to the questionnaire the next time around? Do we have new challenges? Because everybody that works in the field of prevention knows that there are new challenges constantly. And then we do that over a 5-year period of time or longer. So we've been doing this for 25 years in Iceland, and we're always learning. So us at Planet Youth, we advise on coalition building. We help train the people in the local coalitions. We train on data collection, presenting and using the results, and designing and execution, dissemination, action plan, and so on and so forth. So this is a little bit about the Icelandic prevention model in a nutshell. There are papers that I can send to you if you want to read more. So now I want to talk a little bit more about how this actually works, because it's all really good in theory when I show you processes and tell you in a nice little box that this is what has to be done. But it's the people, it's the connectedness. It's those that work on the ground. It's those that are in charge. We have to talk together and make changes. So the fundamental question that we all have is, what can be done? And can we do it? Can we reduce substance use? Can we delay the initiation? And we know that substance use is a large scale problem. It's not just a one problem. It's very large. And the obvious answer is simply to eliminate substances in any form. We know that's not going to happen. We see legalization of cannabis all over the world. And so I think we are heading in a direction where we're going to be allowing more substances rather than eliminating them. So a second answer tackles the issue from another angle. So instead of cutting the supply, we can also think about driving down the demand. But driving down the demand calls for a more long-term thinking, but at the same time, the results are more rewarding than maybe cutting out the supply, because then you have people that don't want to initiate substance use or engage in any form of using substances. So how did that happen in Iceland? And we are, of course, only talking about adolescents. We still have grown-ups that are using substances in all forms. So we are focusing on the adolescents, but we know that delayed initiation helps also when you're a grown-up to be more responsible with substances. So this picture was taken in the middle of the night, downtown Reykjavik, in the summer of 1997. So the sun never sets in the summer, and youth would hang out very, very long. So the city center was full of drunken young people, children. At this time, I'm 12, so I'm becoming a teenager, and really I am becoming a teenager when the Icelandic model was just starting. So I have memories of my parents engaging in these activities that I'm going to tell you a bit more about later. So at this time, 40% of all adolescents in the final year of compulsory school, so 15-year-old, had become drunk for the past 30 days. So we measure in February. So they have been drunk in January, February, sometime. So it's not around the holidays or anything. 23% were smoking cigarettes daily. And 17% had used cannabis once or more in their lifetime. So we were scoring very, very high compared to other European countries. And substances were pretty expensive in Iceland. I don't know how much you know about Iceland, but everything seems to be very expensive, and that was also then. So it's not like we weren't doing anything. There were numerous prevention projects being carried out, but the focus of these prevention projects was very much on showing disgusting pictures of people that had been misusing substances for a very, very long time, putting the responsibility of substance use on the child itself. So it was not the community, it was just, you have to make a decision to resist what is a social norm in your environment. And none of them really used any form of research as a base. So when I was growing up, we had visualize your grave, just say no, just be strong enough, and all these scare tactics. But the thing is, it didn't really work because it was very much this social norm. You were just drinking a little bit. That was the norm. That was what we were doing on the weekends. And so we were doing a lot of things, but we weren't really doing the right things. So in 1997, we had the government and the Reykjavik municipality. They created like a 5-year project, which was called Drug-Free Iceland 2000. There were very many people involved. We had the customs, we had the schools involved, parents were involved. So we created this collective of stakeholders, and everybody started working on reducing substance use and delaying the initiation. So the focus was on primary prevention. So primary prevention, preventing the development of substance use before it occurs. So they weren't really bothered with those that were downtown at the time because they required different resources. We weren't focusing on primary prevention then. So how can we create an environment that is good for children? So the Icelandic prevention model assumptions were that substance use initiation risk is not randomly distributed in the population, requiring us to take an ecological approach. Behavior change is notoriously difficult to accomplish, requiring us to focus on primary prevention, because after you start drinking, it's very difficult to maybe go back. And in primary substance use prevention, there are no quick fixes or long-term solutions. So we focused on long-term focus, and then also on long-term intervention. So systems change and long-term investment. The core elements was focusing on the evidence base. To know where we're going, we have to know where we stand. A community approach with a focus on changing the social circumstances of young people and through that influencing their behaviors. And to create this team of superheroes, research, policy, practice, parents, people in the field. So if we start with the evidence base, what did we do? Well, we started by understanding and analyzing the risk and protective factors for adolescent substance use initiation. So risk factors are those factors in the life of young children and adolescents that increase the likelihood of substance use. And the protective factors are those that decrease the likelihood of substance use. So we weren't focusing on how we can get them to say no. We were focusing on how we can make subtle changes in their environment or drastic changes in their environment that makes them want to say no or not even think about it at all, just do something else. So a survey was created, and this is the Youth in Iceland survey, later the Youth in Europe, and now the Planet Youth, which had all kinds of indicators, and it developed over time. The indicators were not the same always. We tried to find new risk and protective factors. We have to also be very well aware when we have new behaviors or new substances. For example, when vaping hit the market, it kind of bypassed all legislation, and all of a sudden we had a whole bunch of teens that had never ever used cigarettes were just vaping daily. And the challenge that we have now is nicotine pouches. So it's always something new. So we have to constantly be aware that if we are measuring, we're able to identify what's happening in the local communities. So we have indicators, we have substance use indicators, negative life events and strain, screen time, social media, health status, studies, peer group, violence and delinquency, and so much more. That's not necessarily what we always measure. So this is based on a conversation with the community. But out of this, the Icelandic model, the Icelandic prevention model was created. And we could see that there were these 4 domains that were intervenable, very intervenable in the lives of adolescents. And then around this is the community. So we have the family factors, we have the importance of spending time with your parents, support, monitor, and control. And as one goes up, we see the likelihood of substance use go down, and as one decreases, we see the likelihood increase. We can see the peer group effect, and peer groups are not necessarily positive. So you can have a strong group of friends and feel good with your friends, but if they're all engaging in substance use, you're also more likely to be doing the same. So that is something that needs to be looked at in the context of the peer group. We have school factors, both well-being in school, bullying, school engagement, and then we have extracurricular activities or leisure time, really. So structured leisure time is protective, while unstructured leisure time is not a protective factor against substance use. So what happened is this was examined in the context for each of the areas in Iceland, or each of the municipalities, and also the neighborhoods and the school areas. And there were many actions taken. So a few of them that I also remember very well as a child is that there were parental walks. So parental walks they work in a way, they're very simple. We just started this again in my children's school because there was that we have seen an increase in adolescent substance use there. And so we just started again. And these work in the way that parents meet maybe in the evening, early evening, and they go for walks around the neighborhoods just to see if something is going on. They call the police if they need to. They just talk to the kids. They're just visible. And this is both good so that the children that are not in any risky behavior, they just feel safe being outside. And then we also have those that maybe need help. There is somebody there to help them. And then also, the third factor is it creates a peer group of parents, because a peer group of parents that share same norms, same values, set similar rules, that also works in the benefit of the children. Then we had a community level action, which was, for example, a prepaid leisure time card to participate in formal structured youth activities. And then we had national level actions, such as media campaigns aimed at discouraging adolescent alcohol use and cigarette smoking. In 2007, the annual Prevention Day was launched, and the president of Iceland is the protector of that day. And each year, children in the upper classes, so they're in the 9th grade, so they're 14, 15, they work with data around substance use. They have like a survey, they have a lottery. So it really gets them thinking about this domain. And then they create often guidelines about what is protective factors. So a 1 hour day with your family, a lot of them just want to spend time with their families. One year they proposed activities, and most of the activities didn't even cost anything. They just wanted some time with their families. And these are the teenagers that we constantly say, oh yeah, this is when the peer group is most important. So it's also so important to have this conversation with the youth, where of course, the way we do it with the Prevention Day, we have some structure around it, but then they can kind of just let loose and give their feedback to it. So in Iceland, we focused on the data. I don't know how much you know about Iceland, but it's pretty small. It's around 370,000 people distributed over 103,000 square kilometers. Most of the people live in the capital area and in around, but then we have a few dense villages around the country, and then mostly rural. So we started looking in the data, and we realized that we really needed to focus on specific topics. So this was the change that we could see. So we could say that in 1997, we planted the seed, and then in 2012, we started seeing that the tree was growing. Since then, we have been in a maintenance phase of watering our tree, keeping it healthy, pruning it, intervening when something is happening. But this is something that's very important to do, because if we just step back when everything is fine, then we usually lose control. And now I can tell you from our data, we can see that we are losing a bit of control after COVID. We can mainly see it with the older adolescents that are not shown here. So those that are in upper secondary education. But we are seeing definitely a shift. And this shift, there are many possible explanations. I don't think I have time for it now, so I'll just carry on, and then we can maybe pick that up later. So we can see that parents played a key role as a protective factor. And how did we see it? Well, we started looking at the data. This is, of course, all cross-sectional data. So, but we've had time to test this. This is the national average. So we can see that in 2012, when we started seeing, when we had declined to a place where we're happy, we could see a huge increase in the time that adolescents were spending with their parents during the weekdays. But since we do this for all of the schools and all of the municipalities in the areas or the neighborhoods, we're able to see this nuance that when the time with parents goes down, substance use usually goes up. The same with parental monitoring. We could see an increase in parental monitoring, but then when we see a decrease, we usually see substance use going back up. Not all the variables behave in the same way. Some variables behave in a way that when we see a decrease in a protective factor, mental well-being declines. So there are these associations that we can see. But then we have also been fortunate enough to work with longitudinal data, which is based on the individual. And then we could see when students started hanging out less outside. I don't know if you heard this about Iceland, but it's often been said that we have a curfew. But we do have a law around outside hours, and adolescents that are 12, 13, 14, 15, they have to be at home by 10 in the evening in the wintertime and at midnight in the summertime. But this was a law also in 1992, but it wasn't enforced. And it wasn't really enforced there either by the police or anything. They would pick you up and put you home if you were outside drinking. But the thing is, what happens is that we had an NGO called the Together Group, or Samanhópur in Icelandic. And they kind of shifted the norms a bit, because they just created this awareness. They just let all the parents know that this was the law, that the children should not be outside after 10. And then after that, the parents kind of just were all in agreement, because they created then a strong group of parents that agree. And then when Johnny came and said, well, Paul can stay out until midnight, Johnny's mom could say, no, he can't. We know he can't. We've all talked to each other. And this is before Facebook groups, when people would just go on Messenger and Facebook groups to coordinate what they allow and what they do not allow. Then we had a huge shift also in organized activities. As I said, we had the action of everybody got a prepaid leisure card. Some of our partners around the world have also taken that up, where they're trying to create more leisure activities and opportunities for leisure activities for children, either by giving a reduced fee or a stipend, or also just by creating like a punch card. If you come 10 times, you can get like an award or something, or like you can go for ice cream at the shop. Just some kind of driver for you to attend. So people often think that it's the facility that has the protective factor, that just by going to football, you will have a good protective factor, but that's not true. So we know that the adult professional charge is very important. We know that the culture around the sports is also, if we have a culture of getting a beer after the game, that's not going to be protective. If we have a culture of celebrating with alcohol, either by parents at the games or also by the youth, then that's not protective. And in many of the countries that we work with, sports is not a protective factor. So it's not the facility or participating. And that's something that we have to keep in mind. However, what is protective is that it is an important socialization agent in Iceland. There is room for everybody. And we have municipalities that fund participation fees for children and adolescents. But there is also this important of the peer group is there, and the peer group wants to be healthy. And what happened is we saw a huge increase in formal sports participation. And this is the oldest age group, well, among the oldest, where we usually see a lot of drop in sports participation. So we can see around 10, 11, 12, when they start dropping off, these are 14 and 15-year-olds. So 40% of 14 and 15-year-olds in Iceland participate in sports 4 times a week or more. And this is a very, very important social aspect of their day, really. They go to school, they go to sports. A lot of the things that happen around is also the social life in the sports. Then we also have very many other leisure activities for children that do not like sports. So it's not like that if you don't like any sports, and you're out of this. It is also music, arts, dance, chess, esports. So we try to capture everybody in this formal environment. And that is the way that we have been doing it in Iceland for a long time. So, but we focus always on the close community, because within the close community, there is usually some connectedness. It's easier to create a collective of people within close communities. And we know that the average just isn't good. So if I would give everybody the average figure for Whitehorse and then, or just Yukon, and you know that Whitehorse would represent more of it. Sorry if I'm bad with your geography, but then you wouldn't be able to identify with it. And if you can't identify with the numbers that we're giving you, that we're going to be working with, that are going to lead the way, then there's no chance in us doing anything. We have a small, very small municipality in Iceland that only has 2 schools. And on average, everything is fine. Always, everything is fine on average. Just similar rates of all kinds of substance use around the country, similar in mental health, similar in sports participation, similar in parental monitoring, similar in school well-being. But if we take them apart, they each have their own issues, but they weigh each other to the average. So it's so important, and this is such a good example of these are 2 schools side by side. It's so important to work on these topics because that's how we've been doing it now for a long, long time. And the people that work in the community are able to intervene with specific targets for each of these schools. We focus on measuring often, but when I say measuring often, we got to know what to measure. So we need to have a local know-how. We need to have a local language, a local understanding of how to phrase things, how to get to the children, how to get the children to actually want to answer and want to understand and realize that it's a conversation with them. It's not something that we're going to do to shame. It's something that we're doing to create a conversation so we understand how we can improve their environment. Things change very fast in the lives of adolescents, and it's been and we can see that, for example, with mental health. We've seen a steep decline in mental health for adolescents in Iceland and also in other Western countries, that we have no services. We have very few services to offer them. There's very long wait lists. And I keep on saying that we cannot wait, because that's really the only thing you don't have as a child, even though you have all this time in the world to be until you become a grown-up. There is not this window of opportunity to intervene is very short. We want our data to be like vegetables, fresh. We want to make sure that the information to the communities is out immediately after each data collection. And that's how we've been doing it in Iceland. So before computers became so good and everything was so fast, we would take maybe 3 to 4 months. Now we're working with 1 to 2 months. And that's for communities also around the world. 2 schools, 1,500 schools. We don't want it to be longer than 8 weeks until each community has their data, so that every school, every parent, every prevention worker can have access to the current situation in their community. And then for those that are interested in writing scientific papers, that can follow. That cannot be the priority of prevention work, because everybody who writes scientific papers knows it takes a very, very long time to get through the peer review process. So the core elements are evidence-based practice, using a community-based approach, creating and maintaining a dialogue among all the local stakeholders and all the key stakeholders, both within each local community and also with the collective of communities that are participating. A colleague of mine says there is no magic bullet. Prevention just needs to be long-term. It's not something that you wave a wand and it changes overnight. It has to be consistent. It has to be comprehensive. It's no one campaign, but more like a quiet revolution. So it's about changing the culture. As somebody said earlier in the beginning, it's about shifting the norms. So if we empower those that care and we make them the norm, we're changing the way that we think, we're acting in a different way based on that, and we just got to give it time. But the time is ticking, so sometime we have to start. And I can hear that by the conversation that you're having, that you have a group of people that are enthusiastic to create a good social environment for your children. So I think I'm right on time. If you want more resources, you can go to the Planet Youth page, or you can also Google the Icelandic prevention model and see everything that's been published on it. But then I'm also more than happy to answer all of the questions that you might have, if I can.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Lots of information there. I'm wondering if folks have questions or comments. Now, you practiced this yesterday, so you're better today. Also for folks online. Good. Ian always has questions. Any questions? You were the first one to dance a few times. Don't make me take the coffee away, folks. Oh, there we go.
Oh, okay.
I mean, sorry, Inga, just 2 seconds.
That's good.
I'm even going to bring the mic to him because he was first.
Hi there. My name is Marshall. Thanks for your presentation. I just had a question. I saw one of the national strategies that you had listed on a slide was a media strategy around having advertisements encouraging youth to not use substances. Just speaking from my personal experience, when I was a bit younger, the crew I would hang out with, and I think a lot of the youth that I work with now, a media campaign wouldn't really do anything other than maybe incentivize using substances. So I'm just wondering if you found that effective for certain groups of youth over others, or what those have looked like, and if they've actually been kind of effective in any way.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good question. So the bad thing about media campaigns, it's often very difficult to measure their direct impact. We made errors as well. And when I was a child, well, I was an adolescent, as I said, growing up in the Icelandic prevention model, and I smoked. And there was a campaign of a girl who had her mouth as an ashtray. And it said, kissing a smoker is like licking an ashtray. And it was just disgusting. I don't think it made an impact on people that would smoke or not, but I think the media campaigns that actually made an impact were those that were targeted at parents. So there was one that it was like a young person that had their alcohol, and it said, is your dad your dealer? Because at that time, parents believed that if they were buying alcohol for their children, they would be safeguarding them. So they would just drink what they bought and not the moonshine and everything else they could get their hands on. But then the study showed that that was just in addition. So everything that your parents bought you was just in addition to what you could score yourself through your friends or somebody else. So it wasn't really to help you drink responsibly. It was more that you were just giving, or that the parent was just giving an okay, say, oh yeah, it's okay for you to drink. So, but I think this is something that we have to have with the conversation with the youth, definitely, because we are trying to drive down the demand. We're not trying to tell them to say, no, it's disgusting, and so I would say rather focus the campaigns at the parents rather than at the youth themselves.
Great, that's helpful. Good information. Cass has got a question from the online participants, and then I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more if others are ready.
Okay, Janet Van Bibber would like to know, how much would this model cost approximately to implement within a Yukon community? And is there funding available to implement?
So maybe Inga, you can speak to the cost of the investment, and then maybe our friends at YG would, if they know if there's funding.
Yeah, so we implement the model. It depends on the units, like the local units that are identified. So if you think about one local unit, I think it's around 30,000 euros. I need to find my Google here to change that, or somebody else can change that into currency who has a phone very readily available. So it's 30,000 euros per unit per year. So for the 5-year period. And I don't know if there's funding available.
So I can speak a bit to the costs here in Canada, or at least in Yukon. Hello, Dr. Inga, Eva, it's great to see you. It's worth pointing out that it's probably, I think it's 7 or 8 o'clock in Reykjavik right now, and Inga, Eva's probably already at the line of a long day, so it's great to have you with us, and thank you very much. So last numbers I looked at, I think it was 27 to 30,000 euros per local unit, which translates into about 40K Canadian per local unit. And is in as Dr. Pardon? Per year. And as Dr. Inga Eva pointed out, local units can be a community, or they could be several communities grouped together. And that's where, again, the customization to local circumstances would be really relevant here in the Yukon. We could look at different ways of grouping communities if we wanted to. For example, the Casca communities, or we could look at communities who have joined the First Nations School Board, for example. We could look at having a community in Whitehorse versus, I would think, several communities in the rural Yukon would make most sense here. In terms of funding available, no commitments have been made at this time as yet, but we know that the Planet Youth model is starting to appear in some Yukon government strategies. It will be in the Health and Social Services strategic plan that's coming out soon. I just caught Chrissy's eye. Chrissy's a policy analyst with HSS. Great to have you here, Chrissy. It appeared in Putting People First, a comprehensive review of Yukon's health and social services. And there's another one I'm forgetting. Oh, the substance use action strategy, which is forthcoming, is rumored to have reference to Planet Youth in it also. So I would say there's some momentum building for it here in the Yukon. And I would invite you in your role or in your community, if you're interested as an individual or on behalf of your community, it would be great to hear from you that this is a model that you think has potential.
Thank you. Question? Well, that's not.
Yeah, it's more of a comment. I'm like really mindful right now about how I want to phrase this and not speak on behalf of communities, but I've worked in a couple different communities, and like this has kind of been something that we have talked about, we've heard at different meetings and kind of brought back to some leadership. And one thing that I've heard consistently in the communities I've been in, some concern over like that whole like curfew type approach, reverting back to some earlier times that are very touch and go with our Indigenous populations. And I'm wondering about like, again, it's not necessarily a question, it's a comment that I'm pretty mindful of. How would we shift some of that language or some of that mentality, get that parent involvement in terms of potentially imposing a curfew on kids when that is something that like they've really tried to move away from in a construct that maybe doesn't resonate well?
I'm going to frame that as a good question. Go ahead, Inga.
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. I think this curfew is follows us a lot. It's what we have in Iceland is, well, we would just tell kids to come home when it's dark. They wouldn't come home in the summer at all. So this has been a very good way to just create this balance. And I say balance because it also means that they're getting enough sleep when they get to school. So this curfew is not really, we didn't need it to get to where we are. We could also just use what we use for social media right now is like parental not contracts, like where parents agree on what they're going to allow and what they're not going to allow. So you can create this collaborative effort in various other ways. But I understand that people are scared of the word curfew as well, because it does not have a positive meaning really anywhere when you have to impose a curfew. That being said, I know also with Indigenous communities, like we have no Indigenous communities in Iceland, and this is a very new terrain for us to be working with communities that are healing, and we really have to rely on the experts. We have to rely on the local community to be inclusive, to have everybody on the board at the table that needs to be at the table. And our partners in Calgary, they're running an Indigenous parallel. And I think it's very worth to look into how other communities in Canada are working as well with Indigenous communities, and including, I think it has to be everybody. We have to look at this as a whole, and we're not solving problems in different segments or for different groups or for different schools. We're trying to create a social environment for everybody. And then we just maybe need to tailor the approach and how we do that differently. Am I making sense? And maybe not.
No, it was good. I think some good comments there. Cass has got a couple questions from the virtual.
Hey, Liz Butler would like to know, she says, I work with Sport Yukon, an organization that promotes sport in Yukon. I'm curious to know if you've seen increased participation rates in sport, particularly in older teens and into adulthood.
Yes, we've seen an increase. I don't know what the numbers are, but now again, after COVID, we can see that with the restrictions, the time when they kind of want to doze off, when they're most important to keep them in sports, it appears that there was a decline then. And now we're working really hard with their sports clubs to bring these children back into the sports clubs, because it's just for their physical development and for their social well-being. So, but we do see an increase, and we have from when the stipend started. But we also see just there's so much improvement in the sports clubs. And parents are actually very big players in the sports clubs. They volunteer, they're involved in the sports clubs, they have an impact on how things are done. In most of the sports that we have paid coaches. They work as coaches, so it's not what they're doing in their free time. So the infrastructure around it gets better and better every year, although people will complain still. So that's just areas for improvement, right?
Great, thanks. Cass, you've got a couple more, I think.
Yeah. A 5-year commitment sounds like an essential component of the implementation model. Do you have annual and biannual data that demonstrates or suggests that that model is effective, albeit not as fully effective as the 5-year commitment?
No, not really. So we know, but what happens first is you get the baseline. So, and then in a second time point, maybe nothing has changed because everybody is just very new to this. So we are hoping by the third time point that we actually see a change. One reason for the 5-year commitment is then you can create a structure across politics, because in very many communities and countries, politicians get elected on a 2-year basis or a 4-year basis. So if you're able to transcend politics, if that makes sense. So we just don't get someone new in charge that wants to cut out the primary prevention, and then we're kind of back to square one.
Okay, last question from the floor, and then I see Jen's got a question, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, that's good because I've only got one left. Last question, was there difference in engagement and in success between rural and urban communities?
In Iceland, I assume. No, not between rural and urban, but there is a difference in engagement and success between communities. So not all the communities in Iceland are working based on the Icelandic prevention model. So we have communities that just take the data, they don't do anything with it, and then they just use it as a baseline and they say, well, we're doing this. This is how it is right now. But then we have other communities that look at the data, they look for each school, they go to the schools, they present the data to the parents. And there we see a difference. For example, one year we had a school that was very high on vaping, just very high. And the people working in the prevention team in the community just went to the stores that sell vaping devices and told them that you can't be selling to kids. And they started working on that aspect. They started working with recreational centers that children can go to after school if they just want to hang out, play PlayStation, talk to. But there's a grown-up there that's supervising. They talk to them. And then in the year to follow, we had 0% of students that were vaping. So it really did make a difference. But I don't think we can say that rural and urban communities, that's the reason.
Well, those are impressive numbers and good points. Jen's got a question.
I'll try and make this brief, but I'm wondering about supporting parents who might not have the capacity to do some of the guardianship roles that you're explaining. Like sometimes here in the Yukon and other places, home can actually be a riskier place for youth to spend their time. So I'm wondering how you navigated that.
Yeah, well, I think in this case, we have to have other resources as well. When home is not a safe space for youth, we have to have other resources, and we are not longer relying on primary prevention. That being said, we do know that if we have a strong group of parental peers, let's say, in a community, of parents that have similar values, the parents that don't allow their children to hang out, the parents that welcome other children into the home, know their name, are interested also in their children's friends, that is a protective factor. So the idea is that we would capture these students through that net. And at the same time, we also see that sports is a bigger protective factor for children that come from homes with conflict or violence, that then their sports participation is a bigger protective factor than for those that have the resources at home.
Great. Can you join me in giving Dr. Inga Eva a big round of applause for this informative session?